Will you cover the Bernie tweet? There's not that much to talk about, really. Bernie Sanders has always put in the effort to take a bad faith proposition from Republicans and say, okay, if you're being good faith, I'll work with you on it. He's done this like dozens of times over the course of his career. It's not really new or interesting. Elon Musk is right. Sorry. Elon Musk is right. The Pentagon, with a budget of $886 billion, just failed its 7th audit in a row. It's lost track of billions. Last year, only 13 senators voted against the military-industrial complex and a defense budget full of waste and fraud. That must change. That's, I mean, he says like stuff like this pretty often. It's not really new. There are some people losing their minds over it, saying like, oh, you know, Bernie Sanders is folding over to the right or whatever. He's not. If anything, like I don't think that Bernie Sanders is ideologically equipped to handle what's going on right now. I think that doesn't mean that he's kowtowing in any way. Oh, I love the Jenk response. Yeah. I asked to be put in charge of this project, but I'm happy to defer to Bernie Sanders. Remember when Jenk was like, I asked to be put in charge of defunding the greatest, you know, the largest military / bureaucracy ever in human history. But my YouTuber podcaster credentials apparently weren't up to the chops. Imagine if Trump put Bernie in charge of keeping the Pentagon honest. It would be the most spectacular act of bipartisanship in my lifetime. I mean, it'd be a good way to get Bernie killed. I mean, it's literally never going to happen. If you think that Trump is going to decrease the military budget, you are actually stupid. Are we uniting, or are you about to get canceled by the left? From End Wokeness, has hell frozen over? You guys all know he's not defunding the Pentagon, right? I don't know how much they've bought their own Kool-Aid. If you support Trump, you realize he's not defunding the Pentagon, right? Like, maybe he highly publicizes that he saved $731,000 cutting DEI initiatives or whatever. You're not cutting into that in any meaningful way. Like, the total amount of money being spent on the Pentagon is not going down. They keep working themselves into believing shit like this. Well, Posobiec, like, knows that he's lying here. But, like, I imagine a lot of Republicans unironically believe this is going to happen. And they're going to think the Pentagon was defunded if Trump cuts a DEI program that costs, like, 0.0000000000001% of the budget. Remember, these are the guys who think that the police were defunded all across America after the George Floyd protests. The same way they think Mexico was defeated by Trump's tariffs. True. DoD contracts are also why we pay a 10,000% markup on some basic parts. I mean, to an extent, yeah. There is some truth to that, but I think that it's difficult to comment on that as a layman because sometimes there's a reason for those cost markups. It reminds me of when we saw, there was that one like Twitter post where somebody was like, this is a single steel bolt. It cost $50, you know, and it's used in aerospace. And it's like, okay, if that's an aerospace grade machine bolt, that thing is probably spec'd down to like the billionth of a micrometer, you know? Like there's probably like that's being used in aerospace. I assume, and not just regular, I mean, they're not building, you know, like an Airbus with that. Like that's probably being used in some insanely fancy shit, you know? Like I would rather, I don't want to buy the bolts being used in that hardware from Home Depot, I'll say that much. True story, my grandfather was appointed Undersecretary of Defense under Reagan with a job of cutting Pentagon spending. Turns out the job was made up as a joint plan by both Reagan's COS and Tip O'Neill, the Democratic Speaker of the House at the time, to set up to fail, knowing full well the job was impossible, and he was subsequently fired. A lifelong GOPer, he never voted Republican again after that. I have no way of knowing whether you're telling the truth, but I choose to believe you because that sounds pretty accurate, yeah. MIC, baby! I hate Friedman, man. It's genuinely insane how much I hate him. What a spineless, valueless wretch. I saw his interview of Bernie Sanders, and the only time he expressed an opinion was to defend Elon Musk. I'm not joking. It was 100% questions directed at Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders said something that could be like interpreted as a criticism of Elon, and Lex Friedman was like, well, hold on. He's like the epic Reddit man who builds us rocket machines that'll take us to Mars and does lots of good for science, right? Does Lex have a spine dependent on the subject then? Well, no. He just follows the money. How the shit do people watch Lex without getting bored? For the people he gets on, Lex himself is incredibly boring. Kind of like Joe Rogan, honestly. Joe bounces off other people pretty well, but on his own, I think that he's pretty uninteresting, you know? 5-hour podcast between Lex and Joe Rogan. See, that would be really boring, which kind of reaffirms the point, right? The Elon Rogan podcasts were both horrible. Well, they got a lot of views.